Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. So the title of my presentation today will be the theoretical construction of female embodiment in the feminist phenomenological framework of Iris Young. And we will focus now on the critical rearticulation of the dialectic between Merleau-Ponty philosophy and the Bavarian intellectual heritage. To begin with, the relation between feminist theory and the phenomenological tradition is characterized by bilateral epistemological skepticism, misinterpretations, and critical problematizations. In the last 2 decades of the 20th century, this two-sided reservation gradually faded out by opening up the way for the development of a philosophically fertile correlation between the theoretical production and the political orientation of feminism and the constitutive principles of classic phenomenological thought, especially the Merleau-Pontian phenomenology of perception. In comparison to the mutually influential co-evolution of feminism with other philosophical theories, such as structuralism, deconstruction, postmodernism, and Marxism, or distinct scientific disciplines, such as psychoanalysis and sociology, the attempt to develop a dialectic between phenomenology and feminism was initially abandoned by feminist thinkers on the grounds of the alleged insurmountable incompatibility between the two. Feminist theory's early hesitance towards phenomenology is based on the first feminist perception of the latter as a profoundly phallogocentric, essentialistic, abstract, and apolitical philosophical tradition. To these theoretical views, the phenomenological subject is mostly constructed as a masculine archetype via the suppression of gendered aspects of the lived corporeal experience. Furthermore, under the influence of postmodernism, the anti-essentialist problematization of experience in the realm of feminist theory led to the critical reinterpretation of experience as a discursive epiphenomenon, which does not represent a foundational source of epistemic knowledge or as a manifestation of an inherent female essence. As Linda Alcoff characteristically claims, the postmodern deconstruction of experience contributed to the expansion of the chasms between feminist and phenomenology within the realms of feminist theory. Since the late 70s and in the middle of the 80s, numerous feminist thinkers such as Ariadni Young and many others reapproached phenomenology with critical epistemological devices. In the substantial contribution of the above, we trace the dawning of feminist phenomenology as a dynamic and fluid theoretical transaction orientated at the rearticulation of female subjectivity, sexuality, and lived experience in terms of corporeality, fluidity, relationality, and interdependence. According to Sylvia Stoller, the emergence of feminist phenomenology is marked by 2 historical moments, namely the publication of Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, and B, the establishment of feminist phenomenology as an independent academic field of study in numerous universities in the 80s. Contemporary feminist thinkers converse with the phenomenological tradition in 2 distinct modalities. At the first level, feminist phenomenology centers on the critical rereading of classic phenomenological works under a renewed feminist prism, leading to the surfacing of crucial feminist critiques on the epistemological limitations and gender invisibilizing functions of the latter. At the second level, feminist phenomenology implements the phenomenological conceptions, principles, systems, and methodologies in their novel feminist analysis of crucial aspects of female experiences. Most feminist phenomenologists adopt a combined methodology of the above epistemological frameworks. In this regard, they conjoin the critical refutation of the male-centered pillars of the phenomenological tradition with a productive articulation of radical phenomenological explorations of the marginalized female and queer corporeal experiences. This progressively augmenting production of novel feminist phenomenological approaches and revolutionary critiques forges an ambivalent codependent relationality between phenomenology and feminism. As Linda Alcoff characteristically examines, classic phenomenology needs feminism in order not to result in a mere spectacle in the Museum of the History of Philosophy. Indeed, feminist problematizations of the classic phenomenological tradition contribute to the critical redirection of contemporary phenomenology. Accordingly, phenomenology provides feminist theory with fertile epistemic, conceptual, and methodological devices that could liberate it from major theoretical and political dilemmas. Via the phenomenological reconstitution of the embodied female experience, contemporary feminist theory re-examines the emergence of an anti-essentialistic gender identity, which is neither reduced to the biological determinism of a pure female essence, nor is it constructed on the basis of the redemption of materiality of the gendered lived body to an elusive construct of discourse. The theoretical contribution of the American philosopher Iris Young to the establishment of the field of feminist phenomenology represents, with one exception, that of Sandra Lee Barkey's existential interpretation of feminist consciousness, one of the earliest and more influential constellations between the classic phenomenological tradition and feminist critique. Young's phenomenological works begin in 1977 and evolve throughout her 30-year philosophical route since 2005, including essays such as Throwing Like a Girl, Pregnant Embodiment, Women Recovering Our Clothes, Breasted Experiences, House and Home, Lived Body versus Gender, Menstrual Meditations, and two collection of essays in which all of the above are republished together with newer theoretical contributions. In our view, the novelty of Young's feminist phenomenological approach lies primarily on her early visualization of the potential utilization of the philosophy of Merleau-Ponty for the designation of formerly uniterable aspects of the lived embodied female experience. Jungian theory's radical texture is traced in the fertile conceptual interconnection between distinct or even competitive epistemological paradigms and philosophical heritages within a hybrid morphology, which at the same time extends the limit of both the phenomenological tradition and agonistic feminist theory. Young's phenomenological feminist can be therefore characterized as a dialectical mixture between the phenomenology of experience, the postmodern analysis of power, the feminist refutation of the patriarchal structures and social critiques on the oppressive socio-structural system of contemporary Western historical condition. In most of her essays, Young elucidates in phenomenological terms the discursively suppressed, lived embodied experience of the gendered subject within her contemporary socio-historical reality. However, in contrast to Merleau-Ponty, Young does not construct her phenomenological analysis aiming at the description of a pristine or unadulterated experience, constitutive of existence and unmediated by its complex causal relations with systemic extra-subjective social, political, economic, symbolic, and ideological factors. Young attempts to re-articulate the composition of lived embodied modalities of female experiences through the illustration of the oppressive and unequal socio-historical, cultural, and linguistic patriarchal structures by therefore redirecting her theoretical endeavor towards the development of a macroscopic socio-structural critique. At the same time, Young diverges from Simone de Beauvoir's phenomenological perceptions of the female condition. Contrarily to the emblematic feminist thinker, Young does not reduce the totality of the female embodied experience to the traumatic exposure to pain, shame, insecurity, alienation, marginalization, sexual fetishization, and socio-political oppression. Young decides to explore with her disarming authenticity alternative narratives of constantly invisibilized, positive and invigorating aspects of female experience of sexuality, motherhood, breastfeeding, self-eroticism, friendship, and solidarity, in terms of a fragmented topology of resistance towards the dominant sexist construction and representation of femininity. Now we'll focus on the early feminist phenomenological analysis of throwing like a girl, a phenomenology of feminine body comportment, motility, and spatiality. In this essay, Young develops one of the most comprehensive critiques of the classic phenomenological tradition through the illumination of male-centered limitation of the Merleau-Pontian analysis of the mobility and spatiality of the body. The phenomenological theorization of female mobility and spatiality in terms of a fleshed modality of being in the world is characterized by profound epistemological novelty, constituting the first feminist analysis of the construction of distinct gendered motives of movement and relation with space under the influence of patriarchal socio-historical structures and gendered representations. Through this phenomenological analysis, in our view, we can trace the early articulation of the concept of subjectivity in the work of Iris Young by interpreting it as a constantly changing outcome of the interdependent dialectic between the subjective embodied experience and the socio-historically embedded function of the hegemonic norms of gender inequality. First published in 1980, Throwing Like a Girl focuses on the designation of the gender difference in the motives of comportment, motility, spatiality, and embodiment. In this essay, Young creatively reconstructs the Merleau-Pontian philosophy of the lived body with a Beevorian description of the contained female condition. In this regard, the essay critically illustrates the profound differences between feminine and masculine norms of movement, comportment, and relation with space. Young designates the crucial influence of the gender factor on the construction of the phenomenological subject as an embodied and lived being in the world, as well as on the development of her spatial perception, her motility, and her movement. In this regard, Young theorizes three modalities of feminine motility and three modalities of feminine spatiality. As she argues, the three modalities of feminine motility are that feminine movement exhibits an ambiguous transcendence, an inhibited intentionality, and a discontinuous unity with its surroundings. A source of these contradictory modalities is the bodily self-reference of feminine comportment, which derives from the woman's experience of her body as a thing at the same time that she experiences it as a capacity. Young compares the modalities of female movement and spatiality to the gender-blind construction of the phenomenological body in Merleau-Ponty's thought, by identifying the latter with an elusively generalized and, in reality, male-centered depiction of the lived embodied experience. According to Young, female embodied existence is characterized by the ambiguous transcendence. The female embodied subject transcendence always remains suspended, since it becomes trapped the moment of the development of her embodied movement in the world in a paralyzed surplus of immanence and passivity. Young redefines female motility in terms of an inhibited intentionality by noticing that the moment in which female lived existence aims at the establishment of a certain purpose, as in I can, she becomes inhibited by self-imposed I cannot. As a result of this twofold movement, embodied female subjectivity reduces the length of her embodied residence in both space and time. Moreover, the third modality of female embodied experience is traced in the discontinuous unity that the gender body presents towards her environment and herself. Accordingly, Young reforms Merleau-Ponty's distinction between lived space and objective space in order to develop the modalities of women's relations with space. In this regard, she argues that female existence experiences space as enclosed or confining by perceiving it primarily in terms of a dual spatial structure and by understanding herself as passively positioned in space. With the term limited motility, the American philosopher illustrates that female existence systematically restrains the limits of her space that is objectively available to her, by introducing a clear boundary between the spatiality in which she moves, namely her inner space and the rest of the world, which is perceived as hostile and non-available in advance. Furthermore, the female subject experiences her relationship with the world through the spatial distinction between a here and a yonder. Under this prism, the spatial conception of the here is signified as an intimately resided spatiality of the embodied experience, which is strictly divided, not organically connected with the world outside of this personal zone. The gender-based differences in the modalities of embodied spatiality and motility illustrate the exception of the female body's lived experience from the elusively universalized transcendent subject of Merleau-Pontian philosophy. According to Jung, the embodied female subject is characterized by her entrapment in an immanent objectivity, which leads to her self-fetishization. This existential condition does not reflect an a priorical or unmediated female essence. On the contrary, it is performatively forged within a realm of a socio-historically contextualized patriarchal frame by revealing the complex interrelations of systemic, historical, social, cultural, discursive, and symbolic factors that in combination construct a reality of gender oppression, social injustice, and cultural heterodefinition. This Jungian theorization significantly echoes the emblematic Bevorean analysis of the construction of the female condition on the basis of a hegemonically imposed return to immanence. It is, however, interesting to notice that Jung's feminist phenomenological analysis at the same time diverges from the negative signalization of the female condition in Simone de Beauvoir's theoretical approaches. In Jung's phenomenological corpus, female experience is not perceived as a static, burdensome, and inevitably imprisonment in a state of passivity and materiality. Jung contrarily attempts to denaturalize and demystify the embodied spatial and kinetic aspects, interactions, and self-perceptions of the lived female experience through the systematic designation of the socio-historical factors that drastically shape the gender-based distinctions that are illustrated in relation to its respective genders, spatiality, embodiment, and motility. Based on the above theoretical reflection, we are in a position to trace a hybrid phenomenological subjectivity in the early feminist thought of Iris Jung. Jung's phenomenological subject is not constructed in terms of a discursively determined product of a social structure and the powerful ideological, cultural, representational, and symbolic functions that are developed within it. On the contrary, the early phenomenological Jungian subject is primarily articulated as a socio-historically contextualized lived body, namely as an embodied perceptive agent of inalienable freedom and transcendent conscience. As the depiction of the ambivalent female subjectivity vividly manifests, this transcendence is preserved even in the slightest form, when it is restricted by an asymmetrical surplus of immanence and materiality within the frames of the socio-cultural condition of female objectivization and passivization. At the same time, the Jungian subject does not incarnate an ahistorical abstract entity which precedes socio-structural processes and remains untouchable from their subjectivating functions. The lived embodied experiences are inevitably determined by the gendered, racialized, heteronormative, and classist economies that organize contemporary structures. In reality, Jung's phenomenological subject is constructed in relationality through the everlasting dialectic between the lived embodied experience and socio-historical structures. Finally, certain feminist scholars, such as Beth Preston or Diane Sisholm, have developed interesting critiques towards Jung's feminist phenomenology. Both of the above problematize the universalized texture of the described modalities of female embodied experience. In this regard, both of them illuminate the unintended Jungian ideotypization of the male body in terms of the dominant embodiment of humanity, and illustrate the anachronistic or even obsolete character of the representation of female motility and spatiality in terms of a restricted and divergent passivity. In our view, these critiques do not necessarily run counter to the core of the Jungian phenomenological theorization. On the contrary, these critical approaches contribute to a more transparent reperception of the dialectical construction of the female embodied subject in the Jungian corpus. By reinterpreting Jung's feminist phenomenology, we are in a position to understand that the female tropisms of existence do not echo an ahistorical or depoliticized essence of femininity, and consecutively, they do not aspire to develop a universalized reality that determine in pre-crystallized ways the lived female experience. The gendered-based modality of embodied existence are developed as socio-historically variable outcomes of the interactions between the unique subjective experience of its respective female subject and the suppressive patriarchal structure of modern Western societies. Under this prism, its gendered subject articulates her own personalized relation with the socio-structural system that she is exposed to. She can passively internalize the dominant sexist social norms and the cultural representations of femininity. She can attempt to overcome some of them. She can even endeavor to reshape and relocate their suppressive boundaries. Trapped in this constantly relocating dialectic, the embodied subject cannot completely defy her turbulent confrontation with the social structure, given that she does not construct her lived embodied experience within a solipsistic and asocial nexus, but within the heart of an inevitably interconnected condition of sociality and relationality. Therefore, the social reconstruction of the suffocating patriarchal structures of the 70s until today, which is a social condition that Jung herself acknowledges in some of her later essays by comparing her experience to that of her daughter, does not refute the early Jungian theorization of the restrictive modalities of female embodiment, motility, and spatiality. On the contrary, they emphatically confirm the hybrid phenomenological construction of female subjectivity as a formative and agonized competition of the subjective embodied experience with the hegemonic sociostructural processes. Through this theoretical approach, we can therefore reconstitute this feminist resignalization of gendered embodiment as a negotiating topology between social constructivisms and transcendent freedom. Thank you so much for your time.